Okay, and it's recording. Um, so this is the Junior Developer Happy Hour meetup, and we have created it. We just started it back in, I think, beginning of May. Um, both of us, Sam and I actually have never met in person, but because of our network through the boot camp that we went to, we both realized we were doing similar things, trying to help boot camp grads get jobs, specifically during the crazy time that was happening back in May, and a bunch of companies were doing hiring freezes and unfortunately laying off a bunch of people. So we wanted to make sure that we could help anybody who was trying to break into the industry, give them any advice that we could, and just make sure that you can keep going on in this direction, trying to make this, if it's a career switch or if it's your first job out of college or whatever it is. So it's an AMA format. Ask me anything, ask us anything. And I'm going to go ahead and post the Slido link that is best to put any questions in. Ooh, come on. There's the Slido. That is the best place to post questions that you'd like us to answer, because then people can upvote them and we can just make sure that we are getting to the questions that the most people are interested in hearing answers to. If there are follow-up questions or if there are resources that we talk about, then we can go ahead and post those within the actual Zoom chat right here. So I think, oh, and then if anyone is able to hang on until the end, that's when we like to invite everybody to come off mute, introduce yourselves, and we can have more of a kind of conversation style. We'll stop recording before that happens. So if anyone doesn't feel comfortable talking on camera, then we can all talk afterwards. I think that's about it for the meetup. So then just giving a little bit of a background about myself, I'm Brady. I went to a coding boot camp back in 2017. I had not really pictured myself going into tech before that. I studied languages. I majored in Spanish, minored in Italian, moved to a German-speaking country, and really enjoyed that process of how to learn a language, but didn't know what I was going to do with it, and then eventually connected the dots and realized that learning computer languages were really fun too. It was the same sort of process. And so after I graduated, I started working at a mid-sized startup called Trunk Club. They had already been acquired by Nordstrom, and they fully absorbed us this past summer. So I'm now a Nordstrom employee. I'm officially full stack and do mostly front end work. So like React, JavaScript, some GraphQL mixed in there, and then our backend is Ruby. So that's enough about me, and I will hand it off to Sam.
Hey, what's up, everybody? I'll just give a quick intro. I'm currently a front-end engineer at Lyft. I build internal tools for the mapping organization web tools. So mostly I work on a geospatial platform, so visualizing data on maps. I took a long journey to get here. I graduated a long time ago with comp sci degree during the dot-com bust. Gave up looking for a job too quickly, probably after 6 months. Never ended up coding, ended up working in the mortgage industry for years until that industry blew up in 2008 and the financial crisis. And then I just joined the Peace Corps and just left America, hoping it would be better when I got back, which ended up being the craziest experience of my life. If we're ever in person, I can chat with you all day about that. I have a million stories from the Peace Corps. But when I came back, or actually while I was in the Peace Corps, sitting in the middle of the sub-Saharan desert, I somehow found out about the boot camp, which was the first coding boot camp. That was like a new concept back in like 2012. So I applied. First thing I did when I got back to America. I wanted to I've always been into tech, so it was my chance. I saw to try and break into the industry again, and I did this time. um, I learned a lot in the boot camp, and it was just helpful to have a community to help me like break into the industry. The first time I didn't know what I was doing, so I just gave up. Um, so yeah, then I did all kinds of stuff. Try to start a startup with my friend, contract work, first engineer at a small startup to worked my way up into a couple other companies, and then now I'm at Lyft. So it was a very long journey. Um, but now let's introduce Kaylie, who I've seen give talks at meetups, and I think I've seen you talk a couple times. At Reactathon, you gave a talk at that conference, and I forget which meetup I first saw you speak at. It was with Ben, I think, Ilek Bodu, who was a guest on this. I can get that link too after I finish talking. On Junior Developer Happy Hour. That was a good one too. Another recommended one. I recommend all of them, but like those are like good to like start with. So Kaylie, if you can give us an intro, like let us know about your journey, how you got to where you are.
Yeah, I mean, what a great program. Thanks for inviting me. And yeah, Ben is awesome. So glad to have him on the program as well. Um, my journey, I guess the first exposure I had to anything computer related was in college. I was a webmaster, like slash graphic designer for this ballet theater in Berkeley, and I didn't get paid. I got free ballet classes, which I never redeemed because I was too lazy. Um, but after that, I graduated, didn't know what I was doing, like most people. Just knew I wanted to live in a different city, so I moved to New York. Had a job called I think it was like International Growth Associate at a startup, and I really hated it. I loved the city, but I just knew that it wasn't for me. And I think one of the ways to see that is like looking at the company and people you work with and realizing that you don't necessarily have someone to like model your career after. I sort of felt like even the people who were really good at their jobs, it wasn't necessarily the path that I wanted. So I started doing some coding challenges and just like Code Academy, just a couple practices, and then started looking into boot camps after I quit. And then I started applying, got into Hackbright, and one of the reasons I wanted Hackbright was wanted the all-women environment, and I also was interested in Python and data science as well. So moved from New York to SF, staying at my friend's couch basically for the 3 months. And once I graduated, they did this thing called Career Day, where they invited a bunch of companies to go over your projects and make any offers to interview. And luckily, I got in touch with Eventbrite, and I interviewed with a couple other companies as well, but Eventbrite was the first offer I got, and I was just so excited that I took it. In retrospect, I should have negotiated it, and I interviewed with other companies, but I was just ecstatic to be an engineer. And then I joined the front end foundation team that Ben was a part of. The company at the time was going through React migration, so I was helping out with that. And then I moved on to a feature team that was building the WebGL based venue designer. And then I got really interested in tooling, front end tooling especially. There were a lot of pain points with our build tools and our just entire system with Docker, and like no one really understood completely how it worked. So I picked one of the tools called Yarn that we migrated to and spent a lot of time sort of debugging it and like contributing to the open source project. And I wanted to continue this path of working on front-end tooling. So I joined the front-end foundation team back to focus on that, as well as building out our shared React component library. Got to work closely with Ben, which was great. Yeah, and then I guess after 2.5 years at Eventbrite, I also wanted to challenge myself in a different environment. I quit my job again without having anything lined up, really. Again, like, don't do what I did. I picked up some contracting gigs, worked for a couple startups, which were fun, but I think I ended up missing a lot of the collaboration and learning from other people, which I think is one of the biggest benefits we have. And like in our field is that like you learn so much from your peers, and like working with other people could only really enhance your skill set. So I was looking for jobs, and coincidentally, Ryan, who I met in kind of the speaking circuit, I think at Reactathon actually, reached out on Twitter and asked me if I wanted to interview on his team. And I thought I didn't want to work for Netflix because it was at the time, the before times, before COVID hit, it was an hour each way to commute. Like on bad days, like it would be 3 hours, just spent on the commuting bus, and I didn't really want that. But he suggested, well, like, why don't you just try it out before saying no? So we got on the shuttle, and then I just spent the day working at the office, and I thought that was really cool. I got to meet some of the people working at Netflix, and I came back with a really positive impression. And I decided to interview, but I decided to interview not on his team, but on the UI tooling team, because that's where my interests were still lying. So got through the interview process, got an offer. Everything happened fairly quickly, which I think is like sort of emblematic of Netflix culture. But yeah, I was again super stoked, and I joined the team, and I was part of the team for about a year, and then I also felt like another itch to sort of challenge myself in a different field. So I switched teams to the browser player team. So that's the video player you see on Netflix.com. And now I'm working on the adaptive streaming engine, which is the TypeScript code base that we have to optimize your video playback experience as your network conditions might change over time. Yeah, so that's where I'm at.
Awesome. And who did you say referred you to Netflix? Was he one of the speakers at Reactathon?
I think he wasn't a speaker, but he was a panelist.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the opportunity just came up just from conversation at the conference?
Right, yeah.
Awesome. Okay, that was an awesome intro. Thank you. Brady usually moderates the questions, so we have a Slido. I can repost the link while Brady explains how this works.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you for reposting. And thank you for that awesome intro. And so the Slido link that was just posted, just in case you just joined us in the past minute or so, I'll repeat. The Slido is the best place to post any questions that you have. It also, if you lose track of it in this chat, it is on the actual invite, the event, like the meetup invite. And that's the best place to ask the questions so that we can allow everybody to upvote them, and we can just make sure we're getting to the questions that the most people are interested in hearing an answer to. So without ado, I see a bunch of questions here, and plenty of them are even upvoted. So I will go on. Oh, and then the other thing that I typically say when I'm talking about how the Slido is the best place for questions, if there are follow-up questions that are really specific to what somebody just explained, you can ask us a follow-up question in the chat here in Zoom. And then the Zoom chat is also a good spot for if we're talking about resources, we could try to get those posted here as well. Alrighty. So this first question is, how does one go about applying to get hired as a junior developer with no bachelor's degree? How do people, how can you get people to call you in for an interview?
Yeah, I mean, I personally don't have this experience, but I guess from what I know, once once you're in the field, like your academic background really has like no bearing on your performance. I definitely have seen engineers without bachelor's degrees that have thrived. I think the more important thing is how you shape your narrative about like what you were doing while I guess other people were getting bachelors. Obviously, if you could communicate this in person, that would be great via Meetup or via your network. But otherwise, if you know, cold applications are your only method, I would try to fill that void with what makes you stand out. Like maybe it's projects, like maybe it's the type of organizations that you're involved with, maybe it's your open source contribution. So something has to, I guess, like make up for what lacks in academic background. If I were a recruiter, like I personally wouldn't pay attention to your academic background as much as I would pay attention to projects or like open source contributions are a big thing, right? You have to build your online presence so that people see that you're pushing code. If it's a popular project, that's great. Like maybe once you learn how to do something, once you learn how to like WebSockets work, you could build a chat app and then you could write about it on Medium. And I think stuff like that stands out more. And it's also an opportunity for people to read about your work and connect and ask you questions. And you could have sort of natural ways to develop I guess connections and like an into a company. And I think especially if you do that and come through a referral, then again, I think your resume matters less. After my first job at Eventbrite, I got referred to roles without even showing my resume. And I think that's actually quite common, where people no longer care about your resume. It becomes a lot more about connections and who you've worked with in the past. So even if you know someone who doesn't, work as a software engineer, if you work with them in the past and they're in a company that has software engineering roles, that might be a good way for you to get your in. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. And one thing I recommend to everybody is just learning in public. There's like some people here, like Yoel is doing really awesome with that, and Josue, I don't know if he's here, but he comes here a lot. He started doing like these videos teaching people like how to solve the problems that he's solving, all that kind of stuff. If you do it consistently, then you become on the radar for people, If you don't do that, like, people don't even know you exist. So yeah, that's one thing I recommend, how to get interviews.
I can also just add that I know like there was a time when people were a little bit skeptical, or like more skeptical of a bootcamp grad, I think. Luckily, we've moved away from that. So it's definitely a trend that having a bachelor's degree is becoming less and less important in this industry.
Yeah, totally.
All right, then moving on. What kind of projects are impressive on a resume? Is it important to be proficient in every language listed on your resume, or is there ever choice for CC. I'm actually drawing a blank. I'm not sure what CC means. But I'm thinking like, can you kind of have a choice in the languages that you're actually proficient in?
I think when you're starting out, I see a lot of resumes that kind of have a laundry list of, languages or projects. And it's hard to believe that someone junior has depth of expertise in all of those areas, which makes me doubt whether you know any of them really well, right? So I think a focused resume is more helpful, whether that's JavaScript or Python or Rust, like doesn't really matter as much, as long as it's specific. And then I think your skills are more believable. It might be this I don't know, some bias, like having fewer options make it more make you more likely to choose. But I think, when I look at someone that's graduating from a boot camp, I would expect their resume to either be front end focused or back end focused, right? And then if it is front end focused, then I would like to see sort of some sort of depth, right? There's this idea of arguing from the first principles, which basically talk about, when you run into a problem, you want to break it down into building blocks. So like, it wouldn't be as impressive to me if you built, an application in Vue and React and Angular. It would be more impressive if you knew how, like under the hood, how the diffing tree algorithm works in React, if you built that yourself. Or if you could demonstrate your knowledge of how closures work, or JS like event handling and event loop works, then I think that would be more interesting. That would make me think that I could learn from you, which is something that I look for when I interview other people. Can I, does this person enjoy going into the weeds talking about a detail, or is this the type of engineer who, mainly looks at documentation and like puts together APIs? Like, there's nothing wrong with that, but I think that makes you stand out from the crowd.
All right. Yeah, that's definitely my personal preference too. I feel like different people have different opinions on like being able to have a broad knowledge versus really deep knowledge, but I feel like for me personally, if I can learn something really well and pretty thoroughly, then I have a point of reference as I try to learn new things that I need to learn as I come up against new things.
Yeah, I agree too. But one caveat, I think it's really important to have fun. So if you have fun building stuff in all different kinds of languages, I would say go for it. But like generally you want to try and like focus and get really good at.
Yeah, I should just caveat that too. Like, I think it's cool if you build, maybe the same project in 3 different frameworks, and then you're able to articulate, oh, well, like I found React good for this, but Vue good for this. Like that kind of critical thinking and opinions are what are valuable, in my opinion, rather than like, I know how to do this. I think it's more important that you could answer why you did the things the way you did it.
Yeah, I wouldn't go with breadth if you're just trying to look good to try and get interviews.
All right, cool. So next question here, how would you suggest job seekers network, especially during this time of COVID?
Yeah, it's hard because like it's not like I network every day. If anything, I'm trying to get off screen time. But I would say go where the engineers are, right? Like LinkedIn is fine for finding jobs, but I think a lot of engineers on our field have sort of I don't know, like it's LinkedIn is mostly for recruiting. It's not where engineers are like building connections. Like I would go to, Slack channels like Reactive Flux. I think I remember being one where like you get to meet other people kind of solving similar problems. You go to Discord channels, like a lot of open source projects have either Discord or Slack channels dedicated to either, you know, like ideas, support, and or just networking too. I'd also say online conferences have become a lot more affordable because they're remote. So if you join any of their discussion channels, that's sort of a free way to meet other people. I would say even like Twitter is better than LinkedIn, right? Like I think Twitter is like a good developer resource where you get to follow people, and a lot of people will actually answer or like reply to your tweets if you ask them a question, because they like are genuinely passionate about the subject. And like it's not like, you know, you message them once and then they're going to offer you a job, right? You have to provide something of value to, whether that's a perspective or feedback on their design or their approach, their article, or whether it's that you're actually contributing back to their project. So as long as you have some kind of like genuine ways to provide insight or even code, I think that's like a start of a good relationship.
I never even really thought of like trying to find new Slack channels. I just literally Googled Slack channels for developers and found a bunch of different blogs that have listed their favorites. So that's a great tip.
Good. It's good to just participate in different Discords and Slacks and stuff like that.
Yeah, or I guess like even asking questions, like if you feel like you don't have an opinion, just being like, hey, I'm working on X, like, do you think I should use this tool or the other one? Like, why? I think people generally like answering questions, as we are doing now.
Okay. Ooh, here's one. What's the best piece of advice you've received?
I think there's like one generic one, which is like, you don't have to be the best at something to do it. I sometimes feel that, oh, like I don't want to start a project because it has to be perfect, and it's just kind of dumb. Like it's easier to just, you know, spend 30 minutes trying to solve something or trying to build something, and then you gradually iterate. And that's pretty much, I think, a lot of my job. It's never to come up with a perfect idea from the beginning. It's just iterating and continuously improving. So if you have this like incrementalist approach, then you're more likely to succeed. Another one, which actually Ben gave from the last talk, was that he nominated me for the first talk for a small meetup, and I was super nervous, and I started having all these self-doubts about like, I only got picked because like you recommended me. I only got picked because I'm a woman. Like I didn't get this. I didn't earn this. But then he's like, it actually doesn't matter if you earn this or not, right? It's that by seeing you up there, people who look like you find the courage to do what you're doing. And I was like, oh yeah, you're right. Sorry for making it about me. So I think that was also another good advice. Recently, my manager also kind of warned me about COVID burnout, and I think that's another good advice, where she said a lot of people think of, you know, Slack or direct messaging as immediate communication, where like if someone pings you, you have to answer them back immediately, but you really are in control. Like the only thing you could control is when you respond and how to respond. So, you know, by not responding at 9 p.m. when someone messages you, you are responding saying you are unavailable at this time, and you should be in control of your time. And I think a lot of people have learned that during COVID, right? Like time is a valuable resource. Our time to, take a break from your work, to take a walk outside. So I also found that valuable.
That is excellent. That is very important. Sam, do you have any excellent advice that you have been given?
I learned a lot of advice from Twitter. That's why I spend 2 to 3 hours a day on Twitter. I say it all the time. I think Twitter is a cheat code for life. But you have to learn how to use it. When you first get into Twitter, I think it's just overwhelming fire hose of just craziness. You have to learn to follow the right people and block the right people and mute the right people. I think it's a skill you just learn by using the platform. One big thing that's like big on Bitcoin Twitter, which I spend a lot of time on, is there. Bitcoin Twitter has a lot of memes, and one of the memes is like lowering your time preference. So I can post a link about what that means. Is just like doing things that will benefit yourself in the future, not things that will like benefit immediately. So when you're like learning how to code, it takes a long time. You can't just like expect if you spend 12 hours a day, you're going to be awesome by tomorrow. As long as you get a little bit better every day, that's all that counts. So time preference applies to a lot of things, but I really like that meme. There's a lot of good memes from Bitcoin Twitter. That's why I spend a lot of time there. It's like really smart people in that community. There's a little, it gets kind of toxic sometimes, but there are really smart people there.
All right. This next question, how important do you think personal projects are?
I think if I'm being honest, they're not important when you are first applying to jobs as much, because I think the first people who see your resume tend to be recruiters, and I think it's unlikely that they'll download your Git repo and then test out how things work. It's kind of, I think it's one of those things that can't hurt you, but doesn't make you stand out if it's similar to other projects that people have done, right? Like we know bootcamp grads have projects and that they've all worked on them. I think where it becomes important is what kind of skills have you derived from working on those projects. And I think it becomes more important if it becomes really relevant to the type of job you're applying to. So if you worked on a crypto project, then I think it signals your interest. So I think it really depends. Like they're not just, I don't think there's like a blanket statement that's like they are important or not. But if it's relevant, then it's important. Relevant to the role, it's important. If they help you stand out, they are. But otherwise, I don't think they are.
Yeah, I guess it probably can be very different from company to company. Totally agree. Like the recruiter maybe isn't the one that's going to care if they're reaching out to you or something. When I have been interviewing entry-level roles, like we typically always ask if a person has some sort of side project that they're working on. And because it's an entry-level role and because like that means that they don't have former experience, we're trying to find people who are really passionate. So we typically find it like a red flag if they're not working on some sort of project, because it like tells us that they're not interested enough to be working on this in their free time, which is probably in some senses really unfair for some people. But just sharing like our perspective at what it has been at Trunk Club as I've been hiring people or interviewing people, I mean.
It also gives you something to talk about. So like even at Lyft, I haven't interviewed like entry level, but when we interview, engineers usually start off the interview by introductions and then asking them to tell us about a project they worked on recently. Doesn't need to be a personal project, just any kind of project. It just helps to see like what the engineer is curious about, what they're interested in. You can kind of gauge how excited they are. Like when some engineers talk about like a project they're working on, they get really excited. You can tell they like love working with React or TypeScript, or they're like super stoked about GraphQL or something. So it's a good talking point, because in the interviews, like, you want stuff to talk about. Otherwise, you'll just get drilled with algorithms or something. You can take up time by like talking up on your projects and stuff. Like showing excitement is like gets you a lot of points in an interview. In my opinion, companies love when the people they're interviewed are just like excited about like the company and like the technologies and stuff like that.
All right. This next one here is, what things can a bootcamp graduate do to set themselves apart from the other 1,000 bootcamp grads?
Yeah, I think it's really tough right now, especially because we're in this remote world. I do think that finding a job for bootcamp grads is almost like an optimization problem, right? Like you have your limited resources, like the amount of time until, you know, whether it's like running out of money, or whether whether it's like physical, like actual time. And then there are different degrees of companies that you target. Like there might be, you know, your top tier 1 companies that you want to join, and then maybe for the 20% of companies you don't care about, it makes sense to just apply. Whereas for the ones that you really want to do, you want to try to network with the recruiters, with an engineer in that company. So I think you really have to choose, like narrow your target, and then devote as much resources you have available to that. So, you know, if you have a role open, if you see a role that you want for tooling, then, you know, you could go and learn how like Babel AST transforms work, and then maybe like write a Babel plugin, and that could be a side project that you publish. And I think that like demonstrates a lot of initiative and interest. If there is a front end project that works with like WebGL, then you could work on a project with Canvas APIs or something like that. And I think being really, really targeted with the jobs you want would help in all areas, like project, networking, cover letters. I don't know if they still do those, but some companies ask for prompts, right, of like why you want to join. So yeah, I mean, for me, I think personally open source helped a lot. Like it opened a lot of doors for me, just like maintaining a well-known project. And I don't think it's necessarily easy, but it helped me demonstrate like why I'm interested in tooling.
Which
So
project was that?
Yarn.
Oh, how did you get started working on Yarn?
We ran into some bugs at work, so I fixed a bug that was that we were facing on the issue tracker, and then I kind of understood how the code base works, and I really liked working with CLIs, and that it's kind of a UI, but UI for developers. And then I also liked the immediate feedback aspect of it, which is like we did a release pretty often, and then a developers would comment about it on Twitter, and then they would say, oh, this feature you built was neat. And like there was a lot of satisfaction getting that immediate feedback. And then I just like continued working on like some of their major features for the 1.0 release, fix more bugs, like participated in a couple RFCs. And then one day they just made me the maintainer, and I was like super stoked. And then like soon realized that there's actually a lot more work. Like I was really glad that I wasn't like the core maintainer, because it's very thankless labor. I think the industry really hasn't solved the how to fund open source issue.
GitHub
So
sponsors is a good step. I sponsor a few devs.
yeah. I think, you know, once everyone has jobs, like it's good to give back to the community
Yep.
and like help out. So
They
definitely
make
agree.
my life easier. So
Yeah, or if you
I
even
like
think about
to
like how
contribute.
much like money it would cost to hire people to use the tools that we use, right? Like at least like with package manager, there's like npm and yarn, but like if ESLint was gone, like how would we start linting our code? And like I think ESLint actually has like publicly said that they're facing a lot of like financial issues and they just can't keep up to pay their maintainers. So yeah, it's I think it's a really good way. I also think a lot of open source maintainers are trying to become more approachable, so that like React Team, for example, I think tries so that it's easier for contributors to you know, work on features in their code base. So it's a really good learning opportunity if you enjoy that kind of stuff. Like it could be daunting at first, but you get a lot of help if you try to solve a bug, or like even if it's like helping with documentation. I think it's nice to learn how kind of the CI process works from front to end.
Do you have any recommendations on how someone can get started with open source?
I would say pick a tool that you like using, or at least the one that you use every day, right? So maybe if you're a front-end developer, maybe that's React, maybe it's like styled components. Pick something you're familiar with, and then go through the issue tracker and then see if you find like a label that says like good for first-time contributors. A lot of open source projects have that. And then join their Slack channel or whatever they use to communicate. And then ask lots of questions and code. You could try to pair program with maybe one of the maintainers if they're open to it. And yeah, be helpful, be consistent, write tests for your first pull requests. Try to follow their format. They usually have contributing guidelines. Yeah, I mean, again, I think like be mindful with the time you spent, because I think at one point I was spending too much time on it and I definitely got burnt out, and now I don't really contribute anymore. So I think just be mindful with how you spend your time.
Awesome, thanks.
Very helpful, thank you. So if people are looking for a Slack group, is that typically documented, like here's our Slack space, like in the README?
Yeah, or like contributing.md. A lot of the bigger projects have contribution guidelines, so yeah.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, what should a person seeking entry level or apprenticeship or internship, associate positions expect for salary? And I guess, yeah, it says East Coast and West Coast. I know we're gonna, there's a huge variety of salaries we can be talking here.
Yeah. Well, there's some public information out there, right? Like levels.fyi and Glassdoor. There's also a friend of a friend started a website called Candor, and that lists all of the companies that are hiring during COVID. And I think now they have salary information as well. I think honestly, like salary, unless it's like atrocious, shouldn't matter for your first job. I mean, definitely negotiate if you have multiple offers, but you should be optimizing for your learning potential. So rather than trying to get extra $1,000, for example, you might want to optimize for companies that have mentorship available, have experienced engineers who could teach you, look at how much they're publishing online about the work that they're doing, ask a lot of questions about their culture. Yeah, in terms of dollar amount, I don't specifically know, but I would use online research for that. Definitely, I try to do some research or ask friends or ask people in the industry if you get an offer, see if it's valid, especially if it's a startup and has like the stock component to it, then have someone else read it over.
Yeah, you have to do a lot of research because it ranges from 0 to like 120,000 probably a year, salaries for like a junior developer.
Right.
So yeah, my feeling too is take whatever you can get. Like to me, it also depends on you. Like I would just take anything, as long as it's enjoyable. I don't hate it, and if I hate going to work every day, then I would just quit. Because even if you take it and you quit after 2 weeks, because it's really bad, the worst is you burn a bridge. Maybe you don't have to put it on your resume. Like if you like went to work there and just left. So I don't think there's any harm with just taking whatever you can get. I kind of did that. My first gig, I got paid $25 an hour, no benefits, in San Francisco, which is a really little bit. In 2013, that was like a really low paying job. But I just kept going up every job I went. And you don't have to always keep going up too. It's just whatever your preference is. Salary is not the most important thing for everybody. Some people it is. So you got to decide what's important to you.
Yeah, I mean, I had the same feeling where like I felt like they were paying me to learn. I remember someone asking, like, is there a difference between bootcamp grads and interns interns with computer science background? And then one senior engineer at the time answered like, no, you all write silly code. Like everyone is like starting from ground zero when we're starting out as our first engineering job. So if your financial situation allows for it, I think you could always start low, and if you are proving to be really good at your job 3 or 6 months after, you could always negotiate.
And I know for me growing up, my parents always taught me like, oh, you don't want to talk about salary to your friends. But I actually have discovered it's really, really helpful to know what other people in your cohort are getting, what other people, like your coworkers. There could be pros and cons either way, but if you are able to have that open discussion with your coworkers, it's typically your employers who don't want you to talk about what you're earning, because then if they're kind of if someone's not getting their fair share, then they can all of a sudden speak up and be like, why am I not earning as much as my other coworker that is doing the same work as me?
Yeah, I don't think it's as taboo anymore. I think the culture has changed regarding talking about your salaries. I think before it was like considered rude to do that, but yeah, it's helpful if everybody shares their salaries.
Yeah, that's fun.
Okay. What sort of internships would be most helpful in terms of experience gained? Big tech corporation versus small startup?
It depends, right? Like what kind of resources you're available, what kind of resources are available to you. Generally, bigger companies rather than smaller companies have more engineers, which often translates to you'll have more people who have the bandwidth to teach you things. So I would lean towards that, but that's not to say like there aren't any outliers in small startups. I guess it depends on how small. Like Eventbrite, when I joined, might have had like 100 engineers, which is a lot smaller compared to how many engineers are at Netflix or places like Facebook and Google. But like Ben was an amazing mentor, and I got a lot of help from other engineers, and I think it really accelerated my growth. So yeah, definitely places with a support system. Yeah, it's kind of hard though, right? Because it's not like you get to meet everyone and like vet them for how much they're willing to give some of their time. But I think nowadays there's a lot of reputation that a company has, so you could go based off of that just by doing online research.
Yeah, my company, I think there were maybe around 70 people on the tech side when I joined, and I was able to pair with people and get a mentor almost immediately when I joined. I really liked that. I have had crazy imposter syndrome. I wonder if other people have like a little bit more confidence. Maybe it's I don't know. I see how being in a smaller company really forces you to figure stuff out. Gosh, I thought I had something valuable to say here, and this is one of my one of the times I'm just opening my mouth and saying nothing.
Next question.
All right. Well, then next question. What was your first resume like? Whoops, I was reading it and it actually got overtaken by something. So I don't know where it went. I'm going to switch over to this one. How would you recommend preparing for an interview?
Lots of preparations, but yeah, again, it's like you can be perfect, but the world isn't, right? So there are so many different factors like luck, how everyone is feeling, what kind of questions you get asked. So really to optimize for getting an offer, it's like you could only control what you can do, which is preparing for the role. So ask recruiters for, like as much information as you could get. Like even if they don't provide it for you on first step, ask if there is a rubric or some kind of criteria they're looking for, if it's a take-home assignment. Ask what kind of questions you'd be asked. I think the industry is slowly starting to move away from, asking whiteboarding questions, but maybe run through your head, like, how would you build, like if you were interviewing for Uber, like how would you build Uber? Like, I think those are more practical systems level design questions that you would be asked. So think about like how the company that you're interviewing is structured in terms of their like software architecture. And I think that's sort of a good start. Yeah, there's the typical data algorithms and data structures and algorithms practice, which you could do. But I hope if for junior engineers, especially, and like especially if you're on front end, like those aren't like, I hope you don't have to work for companies who make you jump through those hoops. And for front end stuff, I would look at, again, like the resources the company has. Like when I was looking at Eventbrite, we published a JavaScript style guide. So that would be something helpful to look at. And if you know the tech stack, like if you know that a company is a TypeScript or React shop, it would be good to brush up on those skills so that you have, not only would you do better in the technical portion, but like you have something to talk about, right? Yeah, and then for the behavioral portion, I think it's important to pick an area that you are really interested in. Like, you don't even have to be interested in the company, but you could talk about what kind of technical problems you're interested in solving and how relevant the company is. You know, like if you're interested in like scaling databases, like you could easily talk about how this company is growing and how you want to be part of a team that is dealing with problems with scale at growth, scaling backend systems. So try to, you know, be a little more like genuine in your interest, even if it doesn't match what the company's mission is exactly.
Awesome. And so here is the one that had jumped away. What was your first resume like? What do you think got you your first job?
Well, I think being part of the Hackbright network helped, because I guess that's how I got an interview with Eventbrite. And the program itself was actually really great. I was kind of like being part of like the British Bake Off for anyone who watches the show, like lots of friendly competition and talented people, but that are like really super willing to help each other out. So they interviewed, I think, about like 5 of us. And then 3 of us got offers at that time. And I was sort of in the blind because I didn't know that I was interviewing for a front end role. I think because I used Angular for the first project and they weren't teaching React or any kind of front end frameworks when I was doing the bootcamp. It was still mostly a Python based bootcamp. I think now they've kind of shifted that. But I think, you know, it's like, oh, she used a front end framework. She must be interested in front end. So I think I somehow got interviewed for the front end role. And I solved a JavaScript problem with Python, and it was really ugly, but I still solved it. And what else? I think I was pretty honest in what I didn't know. Like sometimes like as a junior candidate, it's hard to you know, admit that you don't know something maybe, but you know, like being more crisp about what you know and what you don't know is always a good skill to have. It's something that like I'm still trying to work on. And then I think we like joked about something. I don't even remember the joke, but I think we felt like, you know, like, oh, I could work with this person. And I remember even like interviewing at Netflix, I got a question that like was kind of like out of my scope of knowledge. It was about like, what would you do if like, you know, these servers went down, and like I didn't really know any backend system, so I was like, I would probably cry. And then he just laughed, and then we were like, oh, but like I know these parts, so like you'd probably like you know, horizontally scale here, or like add more load balancers. Like I try to piece out the things that I knew, but like told them like I don't know this. But I think just like knowing that the interviewing situation is kind of stressful for everyone, and like contrary to popular belief, like interviewers do want to succeed because they'd rather be coding than interviewing other people. So yeah, like having some sort of human aspect.
Something you said reminded me of the advice. I don't think anyone ever said the words, or if they did, I didn't pay attention to it when they said it. But I got to see by example advice that I think was the most important advice, going back to that question a while ago. And it was just ask all questions, even if you're afraid. Like probably you're going to feel silly or stupid for asking questions. And the sooner, when you think of the question, the sooner you think of it is going to be better, because I feel like if you're at a company for a while and you're like, oh, I should have asked that question a long time ago, it just gets worse and worse.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's especially true in like like systems design interviews too. Like a candidate who does well generally asks a lot of questions because the interviewer will inevitably give more clues on the assumptions and like the boundaries. So it's a really good way to like tease out what your constraints are. So yes, like definitely always ask questions, and it demonstrates your knowledge too, right? Like of where you are and like your process of thinking. So yeah, that's good advice.
All right, moving on then. How should we assess our portfolio projects to ensure they are strong enough?
I guess I feel sort of unqualified because I usually don't review people's portfolio projects, but I would say, does it look like everyone else's projects? And like, what are the things that make it different? And just kind of taking like a third perspective and trying to put yourself in the shoes of the recruiter or hiring manager and thinking through how is this applicable to my team would help. And also just getting feedback from engineers if you know them, just saying, hey, like, does it make sense that I use these technologies? Does it seem complicated enough? Am I describing it right? Or is it just a word salad of all of the technologies that I use? Because I think you have to carefully have the balance of like demonstrating that you know the project technically, but also having like an approachable description that, could appeal to, a non-technical person reading it.
You can just ask for feedback on social media too. You got opinionated developers everywhere. So just build up some skin, because you might have people that give you mean feedback as well, but you can just block them if it's not constructive.
Is there like a tool you use to block people on Twitter, or you just do it manually? It just seems like you know a lot about it.
Yeah, block is a huge skill in social media. I block people on LinkedIn too. I block people that like seem like they're a bot to me. So especially people that just slide into your DMs and just say hi and that's it. Block. Like a normal human being doesn't do that, right? Yeah. That's kind of weird. Like, why slide into a stranger's box and just say hi and that's it? Silence. Yeah.
I've got confirmation in the chat. You've blocked people here.
Oops. You can send me a message in Slack and ask me to unblock you if I did that.
But +1 to asking for people's advice. I sent, I worked on like the first website maybe that I ever made. I sent it to a friend who had been a developer for years. I had never heard of the concept of like accessibility and trying to make sure that contrast is good enough between words on a page in the background. And that was definitely something that I was trying to make this cool, like as it scrolls up the page, it would scroll over the background, but the background photo just was too contrasty, so it didn't work. But yeah, you're gonna learn stuff from people and it'll be good.
Yeah. Also like a tiny tip, like try to deploy it if you can, because I just like try to build like the path of least resistance for someone to check out your work. So
just keep shipping it. Yeah. And if you're making a login, make sure you have like a demo account. Somebody can just like click a button. Nobody's gonna sign up to look at your personal like project. I see that a lot when because I reviewed a lot of people's like personal projects, just people ask on social media, and I see that all the time. Don't even put a login if you don't have to. Like, make it easy for people to like check out your project, unless you're trying to get real users. if you're trying to get real users, make the login, but also provide like a button they can press for like try it out as a demo user or something.
Yeah, I think UX is like definitely underrated skill. Like there's a lot of websites or personal projects that could be enhanced by smaller things like adding an animation or like having some sort of like feedback once you hover over it. You know, like having it be responsive, like little things that show that you put extra thought and care to it. I think makes you stand out.
Yeah. Dark mode.
Yes.
And like you were talking about earlier, it's the iterative mindset. So you don't have to start out with all of that. Get an MVP first and then work from there.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if you use services like Netlify and Vercel, all you do is link the GitHub repo and it automatically deploys every time you push the master. So you can make it easy to keep shipping.
Okay, then. Is there a coding language or other valuable skill you recommend focusing time on?
I mean, I'm completely biased towards JavaScript and TypeScript if you have time, because I mean, if you're a front-end developer, you don't really have a choice unless you get to WebAssembly. And even if you're a back-end developer, like Netflix did a big migration to going from Java to Node. So I think JavaScript is just becoming more and more relevant in the back-end space as well. So I think knowing it really well, right? Like someone compared JavaScript to English, like it's easy to get, first intro to it and learn it, but it's hard to get really, really good at it because it's really idiosyncratic. So in some ways, TypeScript is easier because it puts more guardrails in place. But either way, TypeScript is just a superset of JavaScript. So learning how that works, I think that's helpful. Unless like you were targeting, I guess, more like like the data engineering side, then like pick the domain language that you're targeting. Skill set, I think communication, really, being able to connect with your interviewer. Like we interviewed someone, and the person didn't make eye contact the entire time during the interview, and every interviewer noticed this. But we ended up making an offer to him because his technical skills were great. And then, and he ended up doing super well in the company too. But like, I remember saying no because I was worried about the communication piece. Like, will this person be able to collaborate and, take in feedback and things like that? So that was like totally on my part. Like that was totally my mistake of just judging people by behavior. But I think again, like the world's not perfect, and like little communication or like interviewers will judge you based on like how you react. And there's a lot of soft skills that go into like, is this person engaged? Because especially if you're a junior developer, you want to look for someone who's like really hungry to learn. And that really comes off by asking questions, asking more follow-up questions, and responding to what the interviewer is saying in a in a relevant manner. And just being open to feedback is also a good practice. So yeah.
Very good. Okay. What was the biggest challenge you faced as a bootcamp grad competing with other potential candidates, and what did you do to be more competitive?
Let's see. I think one of the challenges that I felt was I didn't really have friends in the tech industry that some of my friends did. And I think I was pretty jealous at first because it's like, oh, you have a friend that you could go to ask, the software engineering question. But in a way it helped me because it pushed me to like look for the answers myself instead of getting an easy answer off the get-go. So I think definitely like trying to turn something that was stacked against me into, I guess, a motivator for studying harder. And let's see, it's been so long ago since I I graduated from my boot camp. Yeah, it's hard. Again, like back to the bake off analogy, like you just have to be not the worst. You just have to get that one job to kick off your career, and hopefully like someone will continue paying you to learn being a software engineer. So I think a lot of, again, like luck had to do with it. Yeah, I'll try to think of more, but it's just like I don't think there was anything that was I don't think it's like this one thing that I did. I think it was just a combination of like multiple things, like choosing to use a front end framework because I was curious about learning it. Just learning, doing more, data structures problems when I could. Just doing slightly more than average in other areas, like eventually let you, if you're just good enough to pass over that hurdle, then hopefully you're good enough to get in. But yeah, that's not a very good answer. I admit.
No, but it's true. There's a, I feel like there's a level of luck just applying to the right place at the right time, and they're looking for the same sort of stuff that you can offer.
Even
I
just
know that I was
meeting the right person at the right time. A lot of it's just serendipity.
Yeah. I was lucky that the team that I was getting hired onto, they try to find people from really diverse backgrounds. And so I didn't have it on my resume. So going back, I wish I would have played into it a little bit more, but just my background, the fact that I speak a couple different languages. I lived in Austria, in the EU. They just figured like this person might have a different way of approaching problems than other people in her boot camp. So I hadn't recognized that as a challenge as I was going through the process, but afterwards I realized that they were kind of laughing at all of the different bootcamp grads with the exact same resume. And like, how are we going to pick from all these people?
Yeah, I mean, that's actually a really good point. Like, if there is something that makes you a little like different from the rest of the people, like we've hired a candidate who is like a music producer before he went to a boot camp. And like for me, it's not as cool, but like I studied art history, so like I just like even now I think it kind of helps me because like I really like learning like the history of like how JavaScript or like code bases evolve over time, right? Like so like when arrow functions came out, I was like, well, like what was there before arrow functions? It's like, oh, we used to use bind, and then before bind we used to use like ifs. Like that stuff is like kind of fascinating to me because I'm like very drawn to like storytelling. So if there's part of your background, even though like I think we're very bad at like thinking our life trajectories are interesting, but everyone's is to some degree. So like if you could find what that edge is and then kind of learn how to make a narrative out of it, then I think that's a really good advantage.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Whoops, I didn't mark that one as I answered. Okay, so what are your tips on acing the initial phone and behavioral interview?
So this is like the HR screening call, I'm assuming, or with the hiring manager?
That's I guess, yeah, either one where it's not technical. It's just kind of getting to the point where you might be considered for a technical interview.
Yeah, I think nailing your intro is one of like the best way, because generally these calls are like 15 minutes, so you don't have a lot of time. So if you can specify what you're trying to get out of in your next role, for example, like when I was interviewing for Netflix after doing like a short stint in contracting, like I knew that I wanted really smart colleagues to work with and collaborate with. And I knew like from like a lot of the stuff that I read from their culture that I would find that at Netflix. And just kind of read through their mission doc and thought about like how I fit into this company. So like being crisp on your like goals, your like just life professional goals, and how this company fits into the picture, whether it's, I mean, it could be as vague as like the size of the company or the industry, because like most of the times like we don't know enough about the company, I would say. But at least like having why like you have affinity towards it, I think is a good start. And then also your background, you know, like I don't think it's good enough to say like, I graduated boot camp, so I need a job. Like, you know, it's what did you do before the boot camp? Like, how did that lead up to it? Why, like, what kind of problem solving problem solving skills did you develop in your previous job that made you think that you could apply it to software? Just yeah, I think
That's a great point right there. I am always very curious to hear, why did someone decide to go learn how to code? And the enthusiasm behind that answer usually tells me a lot. And like you said, with the storytelling, maybe it's something it's worth sitting down and really being able to draw out, like, this is why I decided to put my livelihood on the line, stop my job, go to a coding boot camp, spend lots of money and time and sweat and tears.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's probably good to practice if you can practice with friends or something and ask for like feedback, so you can practice that non-technical interview, help develop your story. But yeah, it's also good to like, I think generally companies like people that like to learn. So if you can like talk about how you like to learn, that's a good thing, I think, for most companies. And I agree with Kaylie about definitely looking up the company's mission statement and trying to figure out how to weave that into your story. Yeah.
Very good. All right, this next question. What engineering skills are you looking for most when you're interviewing to hire someone?
Could only speak for the interviewing part, I guess, but it depends on the level. So when we were hiring junior developers, it was a lot of like, how hungry is this person about learning? Because it wasn't like we expect a bunch of like technical knowledge. And does this person understand sort of like high level, like what they need to learn or what they understand so far? For someone who's senior, I think it goes a little step above and like really the soft skills of engineering. Like, is this person able to communicate clearly their design, and can they discuss trade-offs of their approaches? Are they open to feedback? Are they able to connect to different ideas and bring in their experience and provide opinions that that have sound arguments? Obviously, if you could do that as a junior engineer, like that's definitely a positive, right? Because I think a lot of the times, like our job involves, or my job involves, like evaluating trade-offs, and a lot of the equations aren't really concrete. It's not like, oh, there's a definitive answer. And sometimes we have to just think about, like, what's the cost of getting it wrong? let's, you know, like maybe these are just small decisions that don't need to be debated, versus like, well, we are making a bet, like a strategic bet on like deciding to re-architect our code base. So like, what are the trade-offs in like pausing on features and working on re-architecture? So like being able to evaluate trade-offs is really important. I think as you become more senior, like your ability to like code, like in terms of like grasping the syntax and stuff, becomes less important. But that's just my opinion.
Awesome. How much time do you have left, Kaylie? We're approaching 1:30.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I scheduled till like 2, but happy to jump out early or stay till later. Whatever
Okay.
you guys need.
We can keep going.
All right. Oops, here we go. When interviewing candidates, based on your experience, how would you go about identifying if the startup environment is right for the candidate and vice versa?
I think it's the level of ambiguity that you're comfortable with. Like, are you the person who, you know, excelled in school and got straight A's because like you really like, you know, working towards a specific target? And are you the person who appreciates like structure and, you know, like knowing this piece of work carved out for you and like achieving milestones? Versus are you the person who's kind of more open to fluid roles and like switching priorities and just kind of improvising more as you go? So yeah, like a personal affinity to it. Outside of that, it's also like a different lifestyle, I think. At bigger companies, I think generally tend to give more work-life balance. Again, I think there are exceptions, but if you're comfortable with maybe being on call because there are less people at startups, if you're at a life stage where like you could afford that, then startups might be a good fit. Also, like, are you okay with, I guess, if the startup doesn't work out? Like, are you trying to, I guess, build a career where you want established names on your resume and like kind of go to this like, I don't know, principal engineer IC route? Or are you trying to start your own company someday and you want to get an experience of what startup life would be like? So I think it really depends on your goals as well as your personality.
Mm-hmm. When I think of, am I muted still? No. Okay. When I think of startups, I think of a lot of crazy hours and unstable apps. Alrighty. How should I be looking for a mentor as a junior engineer?
It's hard because the best mentors, I think, are not ones assigned to you, right? Like I think about the really good mentors I had in life, and they were always like organically formed. Like I don't think it ever works like you are my mentor and my mentee, and that's how we'll be forever. Like because mentors are rarely holder of all knowledge. The best relationships have some kind of feedback to it where you're learning and asking them questions, changing their opinions about the assumptions they had. So I think it's finding someone that is like-minded, but also like comes from a different area of knowledge. I think, and also someone who pushes you to do something you're comfortable. Like I was very uncomfortable with speaking at first because I don't know who likes public speaking. Do people actually like that? but I knew that this would help me grow in like another way. And so I decided to go for it upon like Ben's recommendation, and actually enjoyed it. Not really the speaking part as much as like meeting other speakers. Or like being flown out, like would admit that was nice. I guess now you don't get the same perks, but I think finding, it's hard because you have to give something in return, and it's not, you can't just blindly expect someone to devote their life, or not even life, but devote their time just like for your personal growth. It has to come with like asking questions and giving them feedback as much as they give you feedback. And another good way is to be a mentor yourself. Offer help. Like, you might think that just because you're a junior engineer, not just, you might not know things, but you already have like different areas of knowledge, maybe because you worked on a different project. So mentor each other, just talk about what you learned. Like, it doesn't have to be such a formal teach me all the things. It's really having someone to bounce ideas off of. And yeah, like finding them at work is generally easy. If you're part of another community, then that's great too. I think if you're part of an underrepresented tech, then there are also organizations that help you find mentors.
Yeah, you increase your chances by just joining more communities. And it's not just joining communities too. You don't just go to like Women Who Code or Code for America or React to Flux or whatever the community is. You got to participate as well. So that's how you build relationships in the community. But I think it could just develop organically. Like, you don't have to ask somebody to be your mentor. Sometimes it just develops and they end up just mentoring you just because you guys hang out in the chat room all the time or something.
Yeah, I think maybe mentoring just makes it feel so like formal, but then I would just have like a long conversation with someone and just like, shit, was that mentoring? Like, yeah. I guess like it's just I think it's just giving good feedback to each other.
Yeah, I was definitely going to say something similar. If I were looking for a job and looking for a mentor, if I could just find someone who'd be willing to like work on a ticket with me, maybe if I found some sort of like open source project and there was an issue, to work on an issue with somebody, or if I could work on a feature with somebody on one of their personal projects or my personal project, I feel like that could be a good way to kind of get into that kind of mentorship scenario without having anybody feel like the pressure is on, like, would you be my mentor? Like, that sounds scary to me.
Yeah, that definitely helps, like having something to work on together, or like having something to read together. Like,
okay, we can do a couple more. This question says, I've been to many meetups as a bootcamp grad and have been straight up told that there are no junior developer positions in the Bay Area. Is this true?
No.
False.
Well, I could see how that's daunting, but then I would question the premise of that question, like that statement, right? Like, who was the person saying this, and what what, from what perspective, what company were they representing and speaking? Is it actually possible for someone to know of all junior open positions in SF and definitively like know from all that data that there are no open positions? Like, I think I think not. I think it's probably harder now, right? Because it's harder for companies to onboard new engineers. I think just in terms of economy, like less places are hiring, but I think you could definitely, like, I guess if you were the type of person who would be discouraged by the fact that there aren't junior positions and you want to give up software engineering, like, you wouldn't be here today, right? So I think software engineering will always be in demand in some, I guess, at least in some capacity. And like over time, if you have the resources, like, you would definitely be able to at least find some openings or opportunities. I would also recommend, like, looking at places that aren't, like LinkedIn or like Indeed, because like some places might post roles that are from smaller companies, like, I don't know, like the Hacker News job board, or like several VCs that have portfolio of companies. They'll have the job listings from their portfolio companies, or you could go to their companies directly if you know of them. So I think you could always find them even via your network. Like, some roles might not be open yet, but if you ask someone, oh, well, the next time you have your apprenticeship program, then, like, can you keep me in the loop? So yeah.
Yep. I can prove that statement is false because people from our community are getting jobs. And also, I just posted a job in our Slack today, entry level developer position. But yeah, and I'm also super bullish on the job market for developers. I don't think it's just gonna demand. I think demand is gonna explode. I think it's gonna get larger. So
I guess from, like, also personal experience, like when I was interviewing at Netflix, a lot of people told me that, like, oh, Netflix only hires like super senior engineers, like at least people with 10 years of experience. And like, I certainly didn't have 10 years. I think that was just a symptom of hiring people who, have, I guess, maturity and like knowledge in their field, but it wasn't like people were targeting people with like 10 years of experience. That was just that was what people observed. So and there are plenty of people in my company who don't have that. So I think rumors are sometimes just rumors.
Absolutely. And you were talking about a couple of different job boards for maybe smaller companies. I've heard really good things about AngelList, so I posted that in the chat as well. Okay, maybe one more. What was your application pipeline like? Like, do you remember about how many applications you sent and how many phone screens that led to and how many interviews and stuff, and then offers?
Yeah, so right after Hackbright, it was really straightforward for me, because every company that I interviewed at, I met on career day. And again, like, I took the first job offer I got. Yeah, again, like, do as I say and not as I do. But yeah, and then I think as I've gotten more experienced, I got more emails coming through. I don't know, cold email, and phone screens were pretty easy to get past once you have experience. And then on sites, I would say I did maybe like 2-3 on sites, and then like Netflix was one of them, and I kind of also knew that I wanted to work with them. So I guess both times I got pretty lucky, but it never hurts to, I guess, like, widen the funnel if yeah.
You've said a few times how you wish you would have, like, shopped around a little bit more. I personally don't think it's a bad thing. Like, if you were happy with the company that was offering you a job, I don't think it's a bad thing to take the first offer. I'm biased because I did the same thing. But
Yeah.
I think, like, looking back on it, I do recognize that almost every single box that I wanted checked in that first position, the company was checking. So, like, why was I gonna turn them down or try to go get more interviews, just to potentially get them an even higher salary? I still negotiated my salary. I think that's really smart, but I wouldn't say it's a bad thing if you end up being happy with the first place that gives you an offer.
Yeah, yeah. I agree with you. I guess it just goes against like it's counter to like the popular advice that you should optimize all of your offers, but I'm pretty bad at negotiating too, so maybe it doesn't really matter.
If you can time it and have a couple interviews all right next to each other and then get them to bid against, that would be ideal.
I think it's also like you build momentum by having a lot of applications. So like once you get in the habit of doing, you know, like a technical like whiteboarding problem, like it's kind of good to do them in sequentially so that like you kind of don't get rusty. And also like even if you're not interested in the company, it's good to talk to them because you don't know until you talk to them what the company is like, and maybe you do get an offer and you do want to work for them, so or otherwise it's just good practice. So I think just maximizing your chances from that perspective, it's good. But for the ones that you really really do want, it makes sense to kind of focus on your energy and accept it if you do get the offer.
And I do see a follow-up question. How do you negotiate salary without another offer? I tried to find similar roles on Glassdoor. On Glassdoor, it's tricky because you can't necessarily tell if it's a pure developer role. They might say it's an entry-level developer role, and it's actually getting lumped in with like senior developer roles. But as best you can, try to do your research from any online resource and see what other people are getting paid for the job. And then I was lucky that I had like career coaches from Dev Bootcamp. And so they kind of helped guide me, but we decided on like what number I probably could get. And then they helped me craft a sentence of like, I'm really grateful for this offer. I was actually hoping for something around X number. Curious what we could do to bridge that gap, and then just like let them talk. But anyone is like, please feel free to DM me if you're in that position where you're like, I got an offer and I don't have some other counter offer. Like I don't have another offer to try to bid them against each other. So I would love to help out with negotiating.
I think it depends how well you did in the interview too. If you killed it, you got more leverage to negotiate higher. But yeah, I also just took the first opportunity that came to me. Didn't negotiate, didn't look for anything else. I just was at a meetup and somebody was like, I was doing this gig and I don't want to do it anymore. You want to do it? And I just said, okay. That's how I got my first gig. I went to a lot of meetups. I live in San Francisco, so there's meetups every night. I went to meetups, weekends I went hackathon. I was going ham in my first year. I did not do a job search. My job search was just going to meetups and hackathons and just building stuff every day. So I took an unorthodox approach. I almost ran out of money completely though. my bank account got pretty low, and then luckily I got that $25 an hour gig to like help me pay rent. And then another opportunity came up from someone else I met at Railsbridge. I used to teach at Railsbridge. I started going as just a participant, and then I started TAing, and then I started teaching courses. And then I met somebody who referred me to my first full-time job. So, yeah, and I was just taking whatever I could get in the beginning. I wasn't being picky.
Yeah, it's interesting because like I also didn't get my jobs or my last two jobs as software engineers from like a typical posting.
Yeah.
First one was through my academy. The contracting gigs were from people I knew at the company, and then Netflix was also through a referral. So I think it again like points to like importance of networking. I think it also helps to ask. I heard that like as a woman, you should ask male engineers for their salaries because oftentimes they do get paid more, and women engineers tend to discuss salaries amongst themselves. So it kind of perpetually lowers our salaries unless we talk to a male engineer friend. So I think it also goes back to like share your salaries if it's possible with trusted friends.
Yeah, that's super good advice. Yeah,
Cool. Should
Netflix
we
Netflix engineers get paid ridiculous amounts. Yeah. It's go look on levels. FYI, your brain is gonna explode.
there is
Well,
one follow-up question.
I
Oh,
guess
sorry.
Lyft pays a lot too, though.
There's a follow-up question. How long were you working before Netflix offered the interview? Did you feel like you were very senior?
I had that senior title, but I didn't feel very senior. I think what helped me was that I really knew my field well. Like I knew the JavaScript tooling space really well, and I didn't really have that depth of knowledge in any other area. But as you get more experience in the field, people want to hire you for like the one thing that you're really good at. And I think I've kind of lucked out in that instead of hiring like a generalist. So